Hey, absolutely. Well, it's an honor to be here. I've been watching the many wonderful presentations all day. What a feat to the entire Aphasia Access team. Thank you so much for putting this amazing production on. This has been just incredible, sharing and learning. So I think many of you know me, but for those who don't, I'm Becky Khayum. I'm a speech language pathologist, and my background is more in focus in different types of dementias, particularly in an aphasic dementia called primary progressive aphasia. And my husband and I own a company in the Chicago area where we provide support for families who are living with different types of dementia. And I'm also involved at the Mesolim Center at Northwestern of Alzheimer's disease and research there. In the area of primary progressive aphasia with the Communication Bridge speech therapy research study. So certainly in a half an hour today, I thought, goodness, what could we talk about for PPA? And I watched the wonderful presentation this morning about some ideas for integrating people living with PPA into groups, which was just wonderful. So many great ideas shared. But I thought, maybe what we could spend some time just chatting about, and before I share my slides, I just wanted to kind of chat a little bit with all of you here about just some of my experiences in when I'm meeting with people who've been diagnosed with PPA, that seems to be a huge focus, of course, in the diagnostic process, but also a lot of times when they meet with their speech language pathologists to learn what can we do to help. There seems to be a lot of focus on the subtypes. Like that's often the first thing that's brought up is, well, what subtype am I, or what subtype are you? And I thought, you know, let's take a few minutes tonight where I will share with you maybe a way to recognize that the subtypes are incredibly important for research and for us as clinicians to know how to best help people living with PPA. But what could we do perhaps to shift the focus off of that kind of impairment-based approach of looking at the subtype first? How could we look at shifting the focus to a participation-driven model where a subtype is one variable that we're looking at that would impact therapy? So I thought, let's just talk about that for a few minutes today. So let me start there. So I think, you know, with the subtypes, there are some limitations. And first, you know, in the early stages, even some people can really exhibit symptoms from multiple subtypes. And so, you know, human beings don't fit neatly into a subtype bin. And then it's really a moving target, right? As symptoms are progressing over time, it's there's so much individual variability in terms of rate of progression, emergence of new symptoms. Attempting to use that subtype to counsel, to predict what's going to happen in the future, I was trying to think of a good analogy, and it would almost be as if we were working with someone maybe a couple of days or a couple of weeks post-stroke, and we were attempting to predict, oh, well, you have global aphasia right now, or you have Wernicke's aphasia right now. This is what is going to probably, you know, what you're going to look like a few years from now. The same, I think, would be relatively true with people living with PPA. There's so many factors that go into prognosis and how they're going to adapt to living with aphasia. And we'll go over those in a few minutes here. But I think it's so important to not attempt to predict what's going to happen down the road, but rather meet them where they are, certainly educate them about the diagnosis, about the subtypes, but recognize and let them know that they don't need to worry too much about the exact symptoms that they're reading and what may happen. I like to comfort people and let them know that whatever symptoms do come up now or in the future, that we're going to work on those as a team to help them to work through those and to navigate through those. And as Audrey Holland, you know, often says, it's okay in counseling to say, I don't know. And I think for me, that's been a huge impact, being able to say, I honestly, I wish I could tell you what's going to happen, what things are going to look like, how quickly this is going to progress. But instead, just showing empathy and compassion and letting them know, I am so sorry, but I don't know the answer to that question. And it's okay to grieve. It's okay to be upset about that. I'm upset right here with you. But let's move forward together, you know, in addressing the different symptoms as they come up. So that was the first thing. And another tip I have learned from Darby Moorhart, who's a social worker at Northwestern, who's worked with people with PPA for many, many years, is really meeting people where they are in terms of their understanding of the disease, with any neurodegenerative disease. So I often start by asking, tell me your understanding of PPA. And then once they tell me, I say, well, how much would you like to know about it? Because I think it's really important that for people who don't want a ton of detail, that we don't get into all of the details, that we really meet them where they are. And I've oftentimes met with communication partners separately to provide different education for them to meet them where they want to be versus the person who's living with PPA who maybe doesn't want to know a lot of details. And I think, you know, we need to be respectful of that and really meet them where they are. So with that said, now let's take a look at two different models of more of an impairment-based model and more of a participation model. I'm going to share my screen here, and then I'm going to give you some examples of how that participation model might look. Okay. Share here. Okay. So the first slide here should be showing if we are looking more at a PPA subtype driven model, it would look more that we're taking that PPA subtype and therefore we're delivering specific counseling related to that subtype and very specific interventions related to that subtype that would then be focused on participation goals, right? And what we really, oh, sorry, let me put that into the slideshow mode here so you can see that a little better. Sorry about that. But really what we're wanting to do is to flip that model around, as Michelle Bourgeois would say. And so I want to give you an example with the communication bridge model, really how we've been targeting this more of focusing on the participation goals and moving from there. So if we start with a participation goal, really what I'm looking at would be a number of different variables that we would be adjusting over time to meet the needs for that particular communication goal. And I'll give you an example of that in a moment. But I'd be looking at their communication environment for that goal, their communication partners, the emotional, psychological factors, certainly building off of the AFROM model, right, in those circles there. What level of support do they need now? And certainly that will be adjusted over time. Their ability and comfort level with using technology for support. And then you see, of course, taking into account their subtype or symptom profile. And I found that because the symptoms are always changing, that it really is helpful to not, you know, even if they have been diagnosed with a particular subtype, because things are changing, it's a moving target. I like to look at a profile of strengths and weaknesses rather than just focusing on that very limited, you know, subtype and what those symptoms might be. And certainly that's been helpful. So looking at all of those different variables, then it's using a unique blend of communication interventions for each person, impairment, compensatory, environmental modifications, and you'll see along the bottom there, really family-specific counseling and communication partner training throughout the entire course of treatment. So that's just an example here. And let me move on. Okay, so some considerations before I give you an example of putting those that model into action. Just for PPA and you know, people living with PPA versus people living with stroke-induced aphasia. What are some differences? What do we need to be thinking about? And I think the first is that there's more of a gradual onset of symptoms for, of course, for those with PPA. Okay, we all know that. Well, what does that mean? Well, people who've had a stroke, it's a very sudden onset. They really haven't oftentimes had a chance to develop their own strategies when we're first meeting with them, right, to help them. Whereas I found that people living with PPA, because they have developed strategies over time, certainly looking at what those are they effective, affirming the ones that work well for them is critical. So that's one thing to think about. Also, really the preemptive introduction of compensatory strategies. So oftentimes we really need to introduce and train use of different AAC, visual aids, communication partner training on different strategies. We may need to be training those things before they're actually needed. And certainly, email me if you'd like any research studies in that area. There are growing numbers of research studies every year in the area of PPA. So certainly that literature might be helpful for you if you're interested in that. And then certainly modifying the communication strategies and the level of communication partner support over time. So as with stroke-induced aphasia, we may be trying to perhaps decrease communication partner support over time. It's likely that someone living with PPA will of course need increased support over time to still effectively use the different strategies to get the message across and communicate. Certainly paying attention to the emergence of non-language cognitive symptoms. And certainly with the presentations this morning, preventing social withdrawal as the condition progresses. So all things to take into account. So I made up a case to show you how we might really take the subtype into account, but putting that into the bigger picture, okay? So we had the case example of Maria, okay? And she is living right now during COVID, which has really impacted her ability to communicate with her family members and her friends. So as she's working with her speech language pathologist via telehealth, we're just gonna take one of her participation goals. And Maria loves to garden. And so since she, of course, has had a lot of extra time during COVID to spend some time in the backyard in her garden, it's really important to her to be able to have more of a back and forth conversation with her family and friends about gardening. So really looking at all of those different variables, her communication environments where she would like to talk about gardening at home, during neighborhood walks with friends, over Zoom, with Zoom calls with her other family members, and certainly also sharing messages over text and on Facebook. You see, found out who her communication partners are in those different communication environments. And really from an emotional and psychological standpoint, she's very anxious and she's worried about what others might think about her communication difficulties, that they don't understand. She's extremely worried about that. The level of support needed, right now her symptoms are pretty mild. She does typically need minimal cues from the communication partner to really use her strategies, partly because of that anxiety that's there. And her ability to use technology, again, moving right down these different variables. She is independent in using familiar apps on her smartphone and tablet, but she also is comfortable using written supports. So she'd be okay with high-tech and low-tech supports. Now, the variable that I haven't filled in yet is the subtype. And so what we're going to be looking at is maybe modifications for different subtypes and how we might implement the plan of care. And so moving right along here. Okay, well, let's take a look at certainly that counseling and communication partner training, providing ongoing counseling for both Maria and her spouse and how they're doing with this diagnosis and the progression. And certainly referring to a counselor or social worker over telehealth to provide additional support to help also perhaps with some of that anxiety if she's interested in that. And then really to also help with that anxiety, really working with Maria and her husband to develop strategies to tell others about her PPA and how they can help. So perhaps working on script training with her family and close friends to tell them in person or over Zoom, and perhaps composing an email or letter or using a PPA card with casual friends and acquaintances that doesn't go into as much detail also telling them about PPA, what it is, and how they can help. And hopefully that will take that anxiety down in those different situations where she's worried about what people are thinking about her. Okay, let's move into impairment-based interventions. What could we do to help? Well, certainly we could have Maria go into her garden and take some pictures of the different things she has planted in her garden. And so you can see there she has raspberries, cauliflower, red cabbage, and red currants. And now we're going to get into, okay, well, for this word rehearsal, how might we take into consideration the subtype to help with the practice? So certainly for more the semantic subtype, we may work on single word recognition. So she's looking at all of the different pictures, and in her spouse says, oh, okay, find the raspberries. And then working on that word auditory, word recognition, matching it with the picture, and then turning the card over and looking at the word as well, working on all of those for recognition. For logopenic variant, maybe using more of the retrieval hierarchy with different types of semantic and phonemic cues written on the front of the card to help her to remember those different vegetables she has planted in her garden and fruits. And then certainly for the agrammatic or non-fluent variant, especially if apraxia is present, working on different types of articulatory cues. So Google has some great features where if you type in the word and then the word pronunciation, it automatically will pull up the articulatory cues. So the phonetic kind of spelling of the word broken down into the syllables. And then if you click on that mouth, it actually will say the word with the lips moving, which is fabulous, for people to have an easy way to access those articulatory cues. And then certainly also having Maria draw lines between the syllables on the different cards. So again, working on the word rehearsal for everyone, but in a slightly different way. All right, well, let's talk about script training. So we write a script with Maria. She says, I've been spending a lot of time in my garden because of the coronavirus. I love to grow fruits and vegetables in pots on my deck. Otherwise, the rabbits snack on them. I am growing cauliflower, red cabbage, tomatoes, raspberries, and red currants. I also have many flowers, lilies, daisies, and petunias. The daisies are taking over. Okay, so how could we modify the script training for subtype modifications? And I want to give a shout out quickly to Jessica Richardson. We actually were just having a conversation about this the other week and discussing this very topic. So for people with semantic PPA, in that script practice, we might be highlighting key content words and practicing those on flashcards with corresponding pictures, again, to work on that semantic knowledge of those words within the script. And some people might say, well, why would someone with semantic PPA need a script if they're already fairly fluent? Well, as the condition progresses and their speech becomes increasingly empty of content, having some scripts memorized where that content stays fairly intact, I think it may be enormously helpful for them. Certainly more research in script training for individuals living with PPA is in process, and we need more of it, but certainly it could be helpful for people with semantic variant as well. Of course, people with agrammatic PPA may be helpful to record a video with articulatory cues. And also on that smartphone, read it along in chorus, maybe have the care partner, train with articulatory cues with that video, and also segment the syllables on the script for additional practice with articulation. And for the logopenic variant, perhaps doing some writing practice. So writing out the script daily, underlining words that are difficult to retrieve, and then adding those words to flashcards to help with retrieval. So just some different subtype modifications for those, for the script training for Maria. And so now, those are just two examples of some impairment-based strategies that might be used for Maria. Certainly there may be many more, but let's move on to compensatory strategies. And we'll start with high tech, since Maria is comfortable using technology, particularly on her smartphone. So one way we might talk about our garden is just taking a bunch of pictures on the photo stream and using that photo stream, whether to post on Facebook or send a text, showing over Zoom with her family members. And when she's going on neighborhood walks with her friends, socially distancing, she might be able to hold out her phone and show them some of her pictures. Another great app might be Pinterest. So make a board of different types of vegetables, that she's growing in her garden, and use that Pinterest board to share with others, to communicate, to hold it up, to get the message across. Perhaps use a collage making app like Pick Collage. There are many other collage making apps as well, to make a collage with the different vegetables and fruits in her garden, and saving those to the photo stream, those different collages, and integrating those into conversation. Also, they have my dad actually discovered this app, and I said, oh, this is perfect. So it's called Plant Snap. There are, I think, increasingly, we're seeing different apps that have different types of object recognition. So this is great. I went out on my front porch and took a picture of my petunias, and immediately it comes up with the name. So certainly for any of the subtypes, whether it's for not being able to retrieve the word, not having the semantic knowledge of the word, or perhaps having trouble pronouncing the word, really being able to hold up in front of a plant or a tree, and having it identify the name and pulling that up, I think could be a very powerful tool to help someone. Certainly for low-tech options for Maria as well, so she's equipped with both, making a communication book or wallet, certainly the same collage that we had saved on her phone for high-tech. We could also put a low-tech option on there and print that out in a small wallet size form, or in a course of binder for a communication notebook. And also just, I always like to take different parts of people's scripts and link those up with pictures in visual aids. So, the daisies are taking over, her front yard, and the baby bunnies that she discovered in her front yard that will soon be snacking on her garden. As you probably can guess, these pictures are all from my yard, and the kids just discovered these bunnies the other day. So they were very excited, but I'm sure they will soon be consuming our garden that's not in pots. All right, and finally, I think I love to always brainstorm, especially now during COVID, and kind of this call to action, right? And how can we help people not experience social isolation? How can we help maintain friendships with friends, with family members? I always like to be thinking about, well, what other kinds of non-language activities that the primary focus isn't on language, what else could we be doing? So perhaps Maria's having more trouble communicating with her grandchildren and conversing with them about her garden, or maybe I know if I try to talk to my kids for too long about the garden, in a conversation, they get bored pretty easily. So perhaps, as a speech language pathologist, I could brainstorm with Maria, well, hey, could you design some activities to do over Zoom with the grandkids? Maybe you could do some seed sorting. Maybe you could do flower dissection and make a visual aid with the different parts of the flowers, and then glue the flowers in flower art, back on the piece of paper. Maybe you could make a nature mandala. You go gather things from your yard, I'll gather things from my yard. We'll make kind of an artistic component to this. So again, just thinking about within that life participation goal of really being able to talk more easily about gardening, thinking for each communication partner, what types of supports might be best, modifying those, and then also kind of an activity-based approach with different activities that might stimulate conversation and interest in that particular topic area. So with that said, I know I left about 5 minutes for questions here. I hope that gave you some maybe tangible ideas of how we might take let me stop the sharing here, how we're really taking into account the subtype and using that clearly as one of the variables, but that we're also thinking of it as one variable in a whole list of different things that are all being used to support each life participation goal to help maintain quality of life and participation in meaningful activities. So I'm trying to see, Todd, I don't know if I'm able to see if there are any questions.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi. I do not believe we're working through, it does appear that the video on Facebook has decided to pause on us.
Oh, that's all right.
So life happens. But how about your favorite aphasia access memory?
Oh, that's a good one. I do think it has to be taught when we're at the breakfast at Asha, and I have the microphone, and I'm just having a beautiful time talking, and then I see you getting closer and closer,
Sure.
and I know that time is up. And I'm early today. I want to point out that I
Yes,
actually finished
you,
talking early.
yes, you are. And did you also, how about though, if we hone in on one thing from your talk, from your half an hour?
Absolutely. So I think, of course, the main point of the presentation, which we already discussed, is how can we shift the focus to to participation. But I also think just with everything I've seen today, you know, just really that call to action, you know, I mean, and getting creative in the time of COVID. How can we help individuals living with aphasia to participate more over the internet? You know, I think it's been a beautiful seeing all these different presentations today, and I hope that maybe some of the ideas in this presentation now would be helpful to just think about how we might engage more in different types of activities that stimulate conversation over over Zoom.